We go. All right. So, welcome again, Dr. Tom Perrin, professor of English at Huntingdon College and author of Coming of Age with Philip Pullman, in which you talk about La Belle Sauvage, when that had just come out back in
Mm,
2017, I think.
yeah,
Um,
that's right.
but you were just saying that you just read The Rose Field, and I'm really curious what your take of that was.
Hmm. Well, I think I've seen people on the Philip Pullman subreddit being kind of disappointed by it, and I was a little disappointed by it. I thought it was going to be really rich. I thought it was sort of leading to a really kind of rich denouement, and then I found that it sort of fizzled out a little bit. I don't know what you thought.
I had a similar impression when I read it. I read it very quickly
Hmm.
when it had just first come out. And what I'm doing now is listening back through to the audiobooks,
Hmm.
which are wonderful. And there actually is a an interview with Pullman at the very end of the Rosefield,
Hmm.
in which he talks to the narrator. And talk about, well, anyway, one thing that he mentions there is that he actually had a different ending at first, and
Oh,
it was
really?
his editor who had him rewrite it because that one didn't work. But they feel like this one works, and so
Hmm.
I haven't got to the end again, so I'm curious to see what I think on this second read through. But yeah, I wonder.
Hmm.
So what was it about it? You said it kind of fizzled out. It wasn't building to the kind of conclusion that you had expected or were foreseeing. Can you just unpack that a little bit or say more about that?
Well, I think I've sort of thought for a long time that um, Pullman or there seems to be a common theme in Pullman's books of kind of questioning the depth model of psychology.
Mm,
I don't think, with Dust, the idea that matter is conscious, the I in his edition of Grimm's fairy tales, he sort of talks admiringly about how fairy stories are kind of anti-psychological, which
yeah.
or he says something like there's no psychology in fairy tales, which I find a really interesting but completely bizarre claim, given how much psychoanalytic interpretation of fairy tales has been done.
Ah,
Um, but so I thought he was going to go somewhere with that when in the Rosefield he sort of talks about um, oh, I should have looked at my notes. Um, but he seems to be going somewhere with that, and then it kind of where the book reaches the end, there becomes this very, I think, kind of conservative sort of
mm,
uh, you know we should this kind of agrarian vision of we all need to live
yeah.
in kind of villages and work on the land and things, and
Yes.
and it just seemed disappointing. That it's like that's what the natural order of things is after all this time is this kind of you know
Yes. Reasserting something that looks quite traditional
yes,
after
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
amazing, and I think you're right to call some of the events in the second half of La Belle Sauvage like picaresque.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, we're in touch with a magical world,
Hmm.
and yet when we get to the end, we're back in something that looks, yeah, almost nostalgic for a bygone um, order of things. And
I don't think of Pullman as nostalgic after the first his Dark Materials trilogy. He doesn't seem like someone who's wedded to tradition at all, and then to
right.
to find him making a move like that at the end of the Rosefield, yeah, it was surprising to me.
So yeah, so maybe it's helpful to compare sort of what we're left with at the end of the first trilogy, his Dark
Mm.
Materials, where, as you point out, you've got Lyra. She's lost that intuitive way of reading the alethiometer that had
Hmm.
seen her through her adventure. She's going to go back to school and learn how
Hmm.
to read it with the books, right? And then uh, very, very early in the new series, um, she is rather okay. So we have that kind of baby Lyra that we see in La Belle
Yeah,
Sauvage,
yeah.
and that's its own thing. But in the Secret Commonwealth, uh, very early on, she is leaving that world of studies
Hmm.
and tradition, going on another adventure,
Hmm.
right? And and it strikes me that when we do finally get to the third book, The Rose Field, it's the alethiometer itself that is dismantled there, and
Yes.
she has to take it apart, or she chooses to take it apart, um, and and so there's a kind of progressive uh, stretching out, I guess, of the two possibilities for
Oh, you've
her
you've
trajectory.
frozen.
Oh, sorry. Am I back? Uh, am I
Okay,
back
I
now?
think you're back.
Oh, okay,
You're
sorry.
back.
So sorry. I was trying to sort of sketch this. Like there's two kind of extremes that we have with the alethiometer, right? There's working with it, intuitively understanding it, and then this total dismemberment of it that's
Mm,
like
mm.
way worse than analyzing it and using the books to read it, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then where we end up in the final pages, right? She's using this other method with the cards, right? The Miriorama
Yes,
cards,
that's right.
to tell a story almost collaboratively with this character who at first looked kind of like Will, but then
Hmm.
is somebody quite different. Anyway,
Yes, yeah.
so
And I think, doesn't Pullman talk about having plotted La Belle Sauvage in a method like that himself? Doesn't
oh, on
I
cards.
swear there's, yeah, by using storytelling cards that of the kind that Lyra then has.
That could be, I know that he's talked in places about writing on index cards or something like that, and then
Mm,
sort of laying them out and moving them around and figuring out how these images should fit
mm,
together in the best way. So yeah, it's very, very similar to that process. And yeah, so I guess I'm curious about um, how that, you know, kind of reading the alethiometer seems to transform or shift into this other thing, which is, yeah, telling a story,
mm,
kind of confabulating or
hmm
coming up
hmm
with something. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's a question there that you can dig into, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it that all was very interesting to me, sort of suggesting there's some kind of orderliness to the world that
Mhm.
is kind of partially hidden from us, but can be revealed to us through, the cards
Yeah.
or the alethiometer. And I think that speaks to why I felt like the end felt like such a letdown
Mhm.
almost, because again, it's like this is what it was all pointing to, is this
Yeah,
sort of, you know,
yeah. This,
pre-capitalist agrarian utopia or something.
yeah. Well, so one other thing that gets introduced later in this third book. Well, I can't remember exactly where in it, but we get this idea of a universal solvent, right?
Oh
And
yes,
the
that's right.
alkahest is what it's
Yes.
called. Um, and nobody's heard of this thing. We don't know what it is. It's as mysterious as dust was when that was,
Mm-hmm.
first introduced to launch the whole series. But it seems to have some connection with the ways in which um, complex systems of trade uh, like the Silk Road is breaking down, right?
Mm,
And perhaps even the ways that the order of the authorities, religious, civil, are struggling to hold together what seems to be like mob uprisings,
hmm.
terrorist attacks, and things like that, right? Refugee crisis is shot through this whole thing. Um, so yeah, so I wonder if there's something going on with the attempt to create a stable order in whatever way, however small it might be or outmoded, um, uh, in in an attempt to stave off that universal dissolution
Hmm. Hmm.
that's taking place. Um, in that light, I mean, is that convincing? Like the kind of order that we see established, reestablished there at the end, does it seem like the sort of thing that can withstand these larger um, forces of chaos, this kind of entropy?
Hmm. I don't know, and I don't know how optimistic Pullman means the ending to be.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel terribly optimistic to me.
yeah, yeah. That seems right. It seems very unsettled, and um,
And the whole, I mean, another way in which I don't mean to just be trashing this book because I obviously I have a huge amount of regard for Philip Pullman. I
Yeah.
think he's an incredible author, but um, what happens to the whole Britain plot? You know,
Yeah.
that just seems to go by the wayside.
Yeah, are you, well, tell me a little bit about your background with coming to these books. Are you from England or Britain?
Yes, I am. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. And how did you get interested in his work originally? Was it Galatea or is that something?
No, it was when I think it was when The Subtle Knife was out,
Mm,
and I had a friend when I was an undergraduate who recommended them to me.
okay.
So I started reading them when I was about 19 or so, and just loved them. And
Mm,
then I read in grad school, I read the Sally Lockhart ones. Um, the Ruby and the Smoke and the
mhm.
Tiger and the Well and whatever the other one is. I can't remember now off the top of my
Shadow in
head.
the North, right?
Shadow in the North. Um, and so I mean, I found them really fascinating, but it wasn't until I came to write that article that I sort of went back and read. I didn't even know at that stage that he had had a kind of long career
Yeah.
as a sort of straight down the line children's author for some of his books. And some of them are children, some of them are YA, some of them are middle grade.
Mhm.
And yeah, I didn't really realize that he had had such a long career before his Dark Materials or before Sally Lockhart, I guess, because they came first.
Right, right. That was kind of his breakout. Uh, well, there's actually a book called How to Be Cool that he wrote that made it into like a film adaptation, maybe not film, but like a made
Okay.
for TV thing.
Yeah.
And I would love to find out more about how he managed to do that, because he does seem to have had some early success, right? And then it sort of builds and builds and builds, and then
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
his
Yeah.
Dark Materials.
But Galatea, so I read Galatea when
Yeah,
I was writing that article, but I love that book. I think that's phenomenal.
yeah.
I tried to through I tried to interest a publishing house that I used to work
Mm.
for in republishing it, and they were very interested, but Pullman was not interested.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah, because he's kind of cool towards that book, but especially his very first book, which is very hard to find, um,
yes,
The Haunted Storm. Um,
that's right. The Haunted Storm, I didn't think a whole lot of. I don't know what your views of it on it are.
yeah, well, I find it interesting that it exists, that it's a kind of a record of where he was as a writer, and that he's so kind of against republishing it, right? Even though
Mm,
it'd probably sell quite a bit,
yeah,
but I guess for his legacy, for his stature as an author, it's not there with his other books as
yeah.
he's deemed it anyway. Um, yeah, yeah. But I mean, from very early on, he's interested in these kinds of questions of uh, you know, how to make sense of the world, how
Hmm.
to use storytelling to help us with that, and and I guess he's very conscious of, very concerned with the dangers of sort of hegemonic stories, right? Stories that
Yes, yes.
close off opportunities, possibilities, um, shut down certain lines of inquiry and
Mm,
such. Um, so yeah, so I feel like his themes actually are pretty consistent throughout,
yes,
kind of
I
his
agree.
major
I agree.
books. Um, and so in that respect, I kind of wish that they could get republished so more
Yeah.
people could read them. But yeah, but yeah, to pick up on that with your scholarship, was that was there something that you saw in Pullman that was connected with things that you were studying, that you were working on and researching? Is that where that piece came out of, or was it just an interest in, oh, he's written another thing, let me kind of look back over what he's got?
It was kind of an excuse to write about him.
Yeah.
I wanted to write about him, and Belle Sauvage was coming out, and I pitched it to Public Books, and they went for it. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to write about him anyway. But it was, I my scholarly book, my one and only scholarly book, is about aesthetics, and
Mhm.
I was interested in Pullman's view of aesthetics. I think one of the themes that runs through his work is this idea that the world has an order to it that we kind of can't know, can sort of know, can know in bits and drabs.
Yeah.
And that interested me. I think it's in Lyra's Oxford where he talks about how we could read what Murmuration of Starling says if we
Yeah.
just knew the language,
Right.
and that seemed to be a very characteristic moment to me. The idea that things have a kind of intelligibility,
Yeah.
but we don't know it, and the alethiometer seems very in keeping with that.
Right. Right. And I mean, I really love those little books that he has in between the big series, right? Lyra's
Yeah,
Oxford in particular.
yeah, yeah.
And where I was miffed, I guess I'd say, I'm not disappointed like you say. I mean, I find these books great, great reads, super interesting. But like, where does that kind of go in these books? It seems like the alchemist make peace, the witches, they're sort of they remain peripheral in a way that
Mm,
I was thinking that would become more of the central, like she wants to find out what that is and how to do it. And I think what you're arguing, if I'm understanding right, is that, deep down Pullman seems to be really ambivalent about whether that's actually possible, right? Whether
yeah,
we have
yeah.
access to the truth of the world
Mm,
and of ourselves. And
hmm hmm
and I think we kind of have to be okay with that. I mean, that's one of his big influences is that bit in Keats where he talks about negative capability, right?
mm,
It's the poetic attitude of great poets like Shakespeare, at least, to be able to have these kind of contradictions
hmm
and abide with them and live in that space of uncertainty. And that's what allows you to lead to rather to read the alethiometer, right? It's
mm.
kind of that space that you have to be in.
Okay, yeah.
Um, and I wonder, is that okay? So one way to say it would be like the ways that these books might let readers down or mislead or whatever it is they're doing is to try to inculcate, to try to train up us as readers capable of holding contradictories, you know, of abiding in a space of being a little bit off balance, uncertain. Um,
Mm.
and that would be like a way to say like, oh, he did it on purpose, right? And not like, oh, well, the story kind of got away from him and he didn't really know what he was
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
So I don't know if that's persuasive though.
Mm. I mean, I think that makes me think of because when we're talking about the sort of the orderliness of the world, I mean, Pullman's books, right up until these last two, I think have been very orderly. They're
Hmm hmm
very,
hmm
you know, they're plotted like thrillers
Yeah.
almost.
hmm
They're very tightly plotted. They're page turners. The loose ends all get tied up in one way or another. They have twists. They they conform to a sort of they're excellent executions of a kind of
Yeah.
series of plots that we know from the history of publishing. The last two, The Secret Commonwealth and The Rosefield, I feel like are so not that
They're
in
all
in a
over the
way that
place.
is baffling to me.
Yeah.
That he seems to have chosen to, and even Belle Sauvage, the way it does slide into this kind of picaresque second half, which just sort of this happened, then this happened, then this happened.
Yes. Yes.
And that's true of Secret Commonwealth and the Rosefield as well, I think. So I think he runs into a problem with the idea of ending the whole thing, that he seems to have moved out of a mode of tightly plotting his books, you
hmm
know.
hmm Yeah. I wonder if the structure is something more um, a like the epic poem that's sort of embedded in the Secret Commonwealth and the Rosefield,
Mm,
this story of the lovers and the roses, and they kind of have these Arabian Nights, Thousand and One
yeah,
Nights type
yeah, yeah,
adventures, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, like just a much more diffuse sense of where the story is going.
yeah,
Um, and it takes a lot of trust, again, in the narrator, in the writer, to stick with it and try to see it as cohering in an intelligible, in a satisfying way by the
yeah,
end of it. Again, I think for me at least, part of that is going to entail rereading, right? I'm
yeah,
not necessarily,
yeah,
but again, I think another part of it is hearing it in the voice of a teller. So Pullman himself narrates his first trilogy when that was recorded, and those audiobooks are amazing. Although Ruth Wilson is has redone them, and
mm,
I'm sure those are great too. I haven't heard them yet, but But then in these ones, it's who is it? What, Martin Sheen? Maybe I'm getting the name wrong. Um, I think that's a different Sheen. Anyway, uh, the reader is incredible, and something about the way that the narrative sort of carries you along, I think makes it easier, at least for me, on this second go through to kind of just go with the story, and not
Okay.
worry too much about how it is gonna gel,
Mm,
and how different it is from those kind of more classically uh, well-crafted, stories that
yes,
we come
yeah,
to
yeah.
expect from him. So, so yeah, so I know you study, right, the power of storytelling, right? You look at
Mm,
the effects of aesthetic choices and the way, I guess part of this is, from what I understand, like the way that this is um, taken by a critical audience and sort of
mm,
like codified into like good literature, highbrow versus like just sort
yeah,
of mass, middlebrow stuff or,
yeah,
or
yeah,
low
yeah.
low things. Where do you feel like Pullman is gonna land? Like what is his legacy gonna be? Uh, I mean, he might write more things, of course, but at this stage, where does he kind of fall in that pecking order, in your view?
Huh, that's a really interesting question. It's difficult to answer because the version of Middlebrow that I worked with when I was studying the Middlebrow was on the one hand really bound up with kind of well-made artifacts,
Mm,
the sort of well-crafted story. But those things at a time when they were conceived of as being in opposition to high culture, which was modernist.
yeah.
Right. So there, in the 1940s and 50s and 60s that I used to study, um, there was this idea that the high culture was fragmentary, right? It was jazz, it was modernist literature, it was James Joyce, it was T.S. Eliot, um, and that this was that what highbrow creators had seen was that the world, you know, had to be represented as fragmentary.
Mhm.
That it was that because of World War One and World War Two and the atomic bomb and all these things, orderliness was no longer sufficient to represent the world in its complexity. And so middlebrow writers who had a kind of orderly view of the world and thought that you could make kind of well crafted novels, well made plays, what have you,
Mm.
were lying in some way, right? They were cynically exploiting our desire for orderliness in order to sell books.
Interesting.
That was how the argument went. I don't think we have that division anymore. The modernism is gone away, except for maybe in sort of the very small kind of coterie poetry.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't really know what it would mean to say, oh, Philip Pullman will be remembered as a middlebrow writer.
Okay.
I don't know I don't know what that category means anymore, really.
Is he
Uh,
gonna, well, let's put it this way. I mean, is he gonna stand with the Lewises, the Tolkiens of this kind of tradition of uh, storytellers who bring in mythological concepts, weave them together in some way, and have had a wide audience, a lot of influence on their readers? Or is there something about his work that you feel is not quite there, not gonna hang with those authors that he seems to really want
no,
to
I think I
compete
I
with?
really think he's yeah. I mean, if I had to predict, I would say he would survive with
Okay.
those authors for sure.
That's very hopeful for me because I've invested a lot of time in reading him and thinking about because I love those authors as well. And I
Yeah,
and I think he has a really important perspective that is not entirely opposed to theirs when you step back.
sure. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's something like, if you look at a book like The Good Man Jesus and the Scoundrel
Mm.
Christ, it's in one sense it's a polemic, but in another sense it's a kind of rapprochement with someone like Lewis. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you know, Jesus isn't bad. What Paul and then the religious establishment, the church did with Jesus is bad.
Right.
But
Right. Right. So I think this is maybe the last big topic I wanted to discuss with you then
okay,
is, what is the what is one to say? Because I'm going to try to talk to a lot of people with a lot of perspectives on Pullman.
Hmm.
And so far I've mostly talked to people who generally like him or are interested in his work. But this time around, I really want to hear from people who are like, he's bad, he's a terrible influence, he's dangerous. And so where where would you suggest a starting point for having a conversation with somebody who comes in having read his work and thinking that, oh, he's terrible. This is not just like aesthetically bad, although they might think that, but certainly like morally uh, bad, and this is, you know, a problem for someone, especially who's a believer in God, or
Hmm.
faithful to the church, or whatever it might be. Um, yeah, how do you have those kind of conversations, or how would you suggest starting?
Um, I have a little bit. I remember trying to recommend Pullman to my boss, and she was like, "Oh, that you mean that author who thinks that we're going to save the universe by children having premarital sex?" Which was, how a lot of people, including me, read the end of the Amber Spyglass before Pullman, I think, went and sort of revised himself a little bit in the Secret Commonwealth, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think he has quite a cynical view of religion. He doesn't see religion as community, for instance,
Mm,
which I do. I go to church, not really out of any. Well, I don't know. I don't know if this is the venue to discuss my own religious beliefs, but I don't. But I don't see Christianity solely as this sort of terrible machine for reproducing power that I think
mm,
Pullman does.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Um,
if I could, I mean, it seems to me that part of what he's revising in the Book of Dust is his wholehearted condemnation of religious authority that people
yeah,
got from the
yeah,
first, right? And he wants to make that more complex by saying, well, ideological, nihilisms of various kinds are just as dangerous or more dangerous, right? Things that threaten
yes,
the
yes, that's right.
imagination as such, right? Those are just as dangerous. Um, Chaos and disorderly rebellion against economic authority, that's very dangerous, right? It hurts
Hmm.
people. Um, the kind of order that we see among the soldiers in that terrible scene in the train, that's danger, right? Or disorder, whatever, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
anyway, but yeah, I think this theme of community is really important because it strikes me that his view of Christianity does seem to be mostly internal, having to do with original sin, having to do with individual salvation, right? Rather than some kind of corporate sense of
Hmm.
belonging. The one place we see that's coming to mind is with Dr. Malone, right? When she's
Hmm.
thinking about why she stopped being a nun, stopped believing in that stuff. And it's because um, she didn't necessarily uh, believe in that feeling of connectedness enough to set aside her other kinds of doubts or something like that.
Sure,
And
sure.
on the other hand, like that feeling of connectedness seems like it doesn't require the what's the word? The personal God, right?
Hmm.
The messianic figure, or the person with the white beard in the sky, right? These kinds of images. Um, but again, I just feel like people who lump Pullman in with the kind of fashionable atheist writers are are
Hmm.
are, are kind of drastically underestimating the nuance of his thinking on these things. But I
Well,
think,
he's so interested in religion. He
yeah,
seems to keep coming back to it. I don't think someone for he doesn't have a kind of reflexive atheism in the way that I don't know Christopher Hitchens or someone did.
right, right.
That he keeps coming back to religious questions, religious figures, the religious tradition, the Christian tradition in particular.
Hmm, hmm.
Um, and I think that's really interesting what you were saying about how he seems to turn his skepticism towards nihilism in those last two books. I think that's absolutely right. I hadn't really thought of that, but yeah.
Yeah,
Um, and that the um, there's this celebration of what the demons represent as a kind of external soul. there's a sort of celebration of the imagination and of storytelling. But again, I feel like all of that is so rich. And then at the end of the Rosefield, again, he seems to just reduce it to this sort of, what if we all lived in villages and kind of,
Yep.
there was no more late stage capitalism.
Yep.
It just seemed as if he was setting up something so much richer than that as a conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, at the end of the third of the original trilogy, we hear about this idea of the Republic of Heaven, right?
Yeah.
And that phrase, it appears, it's referenced, um, but again, that's not, I don't think, at least, what we actually get by the end of the book, right? Maybe because Lyra herself is so, yeah, disjointed,
Mhm.
uh, and so she's not quite able to do that. But I do wonder if that is the beginning of what we're seeing at the end of the book, right? Them
Mhm.
coming together, having overcome kind of uh, the catastrophic levels of insanity of the people that were chasing them, right?
Mhm.
They're settled in to get to know each other, right? To reconnect. And that's one twist that is very, Dickensian, or, the kind of going to the root of the novel as a form, right? Is like, oh, here's this person who you're actually related to, right?
Yeah. Yes.
This is it's almost cliche. But um, but yeah, I don't know. So so I wonder if that's also a a point on which to kind of revolve and try to, yeah, as difficult as some of the scenes are, to kind of try to hang on to, what would it mean to build a Republic of Heaven, to
Mm.
um, yeah, to be interested in faith, to be curious about faith, um, and yet not to this kind of corrosive level, or on the other hand, like a kind of the kind of thing that, like, you know, if faith only means kind of the outward, uh, going to church, you know, um, doing those things, but doesn't actually change how you interact in a late stage capitalist society, right?
Mm.
If you are sort of just okay with things as they are, but go to church on Sunday, is that good
Mhm.
enough, right? And that's the kind of
Right.
thing I think that's also there in his kind of Protestantism, his
Sure.
tradition. Yeah, yeah. So, well, okay. So, okay. Um, in the beginning of this, we were talking a little bit about psychology and about his view of matter as conscious, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, is there a is there a way in which that view, um, is just going to cause fundamental, uh, problems, do you think, for, somebody who, wants to have a little bit more of a like a worldview that says, like, matter is matter and it's spirit that brings life, right? Um,
Hmm.
is there some kind of impossible contradiction there, perhaps, um, between, yeah, like a metaphysical level of looking at the world?
Sure. I'm never quite sure in Pullman um, the extent to which he wants to insist on on this idea of, I mean, I'm trying to remember all the different moments of it. I think I don't think it's a coherent philosophy in Pullman, although maybe it is. Maybe someone needs to write a book arguing that it is. But he just seems to have an interest in inanimate things having a kind maybe having a kind of consciousness. So I forget, one of his children's books has a severed, like a dummy's head in it that behaves in a vaguely conscious way, or he sort of speculates that it's conscious.
Is that one of the Thunderbolts waxwork?
I think it
Those
is.
ones?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I vaguely.
um and then as I say, there's this scene with the stylings in Lyra's Oxford,
Yeah.
and then but in other in other moments, the idea that in the Rosefield, right, Pan is seems to represent Lyra's imagination and maybe her soul in some
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
And that, we have that idea in the first trilogy that people in our world have demons, they're just inside them.
Right. And you can learn to see it if you
You
look a
can learn
certain
to
way.
see it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Um, so sometimes he seems to have a sort of idea that you know, there is a spirit beyond matter. And
Yeah.
sometimes he seems to think that spirit kind of inheres in matter. I don't know. I just think and as I say, this moment I always remember in where claims that fairy tales have no psychology.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think he's just curious about that sort of
Hmm.
Freudian view that says, or Christian view, right, that says we have a soul sort of directing our outward motions, or
Yeah.
that Freud would say, we have an id kind of directing our ego, and we can never really escape from the demands of the id.
Hmm.
I think Pullman, to my reading, just has a kind of abiding interest in questioning that, but I
Hmm.
don't know if he has a fully fledged philosophy of mind to replace it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this idea of um, matter itself being what gives rise to what we perceive as spirit or believe in as spirit. It definitely there's definitely a tradition there. Um, there is a
Mm-hmm.
book by John Rogers who does the Milton course at Yale, and I forget the name of
Mm-hmm.
the book, but he talks about like the vitalism of Milton's time and kind of like where that came
Yeah.
from and kind of
Okay.
where that goes. And
Uh-huh.
then it comes up to like Henri Bergson in early
Mm-hmm.
20th century, right? But yeah, that I, I I think that that does, like you point out, I think that leads into in our time what's like this post-humanism framework of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which to me is a really dark place to find oneself. Um,
Right.
and so I am temperamentally kind of wary of I even reading too much of that stuff to be honest.
Mm.
Um, so like gosh, but okay, but this has been super interesting. I really appreciate your time and wrestling with some of this stuff with me. Um, the image of um, the puppet or the marionette
Yes,
is
yes. We didn't talk about that too
is
much.
such a striking one. It's definitely one of those kind of core, influences on Pullman and that he
Yeah.
keeps kind
Yeah.
of coming back to. It's there in Galatea.
Yeah.
It's
That's
there
right.
throughout his books. So there's, I hope that you go back and write more about him. I would be really interested to read a piece that looks at, these most recent books particularly, and how they do or don't fit in with things he's been working on throughout. So
Yeah, I would love to go back to him if I
cool.
can make the
If
time.
you can find the time, yeah. All right. Well, again, thanks very much for your time, Dr. Perrin. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.